The power structure is using its agencies, its employees, to keep the population calm as long as possible while they are digging in and preparing for total collapse, societal and environmental. And it's happening now. So if people have any desire to save and salvage any future for their children, we must stand up and face these issues. This can't be something we do in our spare time. It has to be a priority, or we have no chance. Right now, mathematically, if this ship doesn't change direction completely, we are headed for a planet that mathematically will not support life based on the best numbers available past 2040. The Northern Hemisphere likely much earlier than that. That's how dire our situation is.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I have back on the line somebody very special, somebody I've had the pleasure of speaking with once before. His name is Dane Wigington, and you know him from his work at geoengineeringwatch.org. A very special person. I think God has empowered some people on this earth to really help us all wake up and see the truth of what's going on, and Dane has been kind enough to agree to come on and speak with us for the next hour about geoengineering. Dane, welcome back.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for all you're doing to sound the alarm for the common good.
Well, Dane, thank you so much. I'm just so thrilled to have you on. I'm very excited about this call. I've spent numerous hours here preparing because you are working at a PhD level on this geoengineering issue.
We are now being told that the climate engineers want to start using the terms albedo enhancement or cloud reflectivity enhancement. They don't want to use the term geoengineering any longer because people are waking up to that term.
And I think the best way to kick this off would be to play a clip from your latest presentation, Geoengineering and the Dying of the Trees, which led me to write an article, Geoengineering and CERN, Darkness is Being Unleashed on This World. This is from Dane's video, Geoengineering and the Dying of the Trees.
It seems that the effort to try to deceive and confuse the population as to what's going on in the skies above their heads continues, and the whole of academia is helping to hide what can only be described as crimes against humanity, crimes against nature, not just ecocide or genocide, but omnicide, the destruction of all life on Earth. And that's literally what's happening from these programs. Whatever the intent, the result is the same. And for us on the ground, it amounts to biological warfare as well. We know we are breathing what they are spraying.
Dane, I just want to say, first of all, that video really touched me profoundly because you're standing in the boreal forest and you're showing examples of how the unabated UV, because of the destruction of the ozone, is causing plants, even drought-resistant plants, to flash out and die off. And we're really reaching a crisis here on planet Earth. And I've asked the readers of SGT Report to submit questions for you, and we're going to get to all of those today. But I want to kick off with this one from Andy, who commented, and he really hit the nail on the head for me. Andy commented on April 14th, "It makes you realize that the day-to-day stuff we worry about, such as precious metal suppression, dollar and economic collapse, is all trivial by comparison. None of this matters as long as they forge ahead to destroy all life on Earth." Dane, I think that really sums it up. This is probably the seminal thing that humanity should be focusing on right now, geoengineering, HAARP, and this program, which appears to be a program of genocide.
Well, again, the result is exactly that, but the scenario that has brought this on us is certainly much more complicated. And this is what people grapple with, Sean. They grapple with why. Why would this be done? But you have to look back to the origins and the progression of these programs to fully understand that. And ultimately, it comes down to power and control. Such things always have. So you have to look at the evolution of this, though. How does the cancer become what it is? Does the cancer intend to kill the host? Is that the original intent? I would argue that it's not. It doesn't change the result, and it doesn't change the immorality and, for lack of a better term, evil behind this cancer. That's what it is. But we have to look at the beginning, and again, we got here because too many people are unwilling to stand up and face issues before they become this bad. And we've had a population that's been very comfortable in the paradigm that's been set up for them, if you will. And they want to stay in that paradigm desperately. But they're not going to have that option for much longer. Because in fact, as you correctly just stated, geoengineering, climate engineering, which amounts to biological warfare, weather warfare, ecocide, genocide, omnicide. This is something that is so all-encompassing that if we do not face this, nothing else will matter. And that's the bottom line. And even when we talk about issues like Fukushima, for example, which is a very, very dire issue, but we can relate that to these programs as well, because we have enough evidence to really conclusively say that the same mechanisms used for climate modification, like the ionosphere heaters, like HAARP, of which there are several dozen large ground-based facilities around the globe, are being used for weapons of cataclysmic destruction. And even we have institutions like MIT that documented the incredibly anomalous heating of the atmosphere directly above the epicenter for the days prior to that quake's occurrence. And we know these ionosphere heaters have the potential, when they're putting out 3.5 billion watts, to cause seismic activity in a seismically sensitive zone. So these weapons are being used for everything. And in addition, Sean, every breath we take is laden with this material, which is affecting our neurological function, which affects our cognitive function. If we can't think clearly, if we're not healthy, what challenge can we face?
I'm so glad that you mentioned HAARP, because it does play a role in what's going on. And I just want to circle back to me having said genocide, and you actually correctly stating that it's worse than genocide, it's omnicide. And as you note in your video, Geoengineering and the Dying of the Trees, it is the death of all life on planet Earth. That is what we're seeing, and that's what touched me so much about your video, Dane, because it's clear that that's what it is. And people will say, why? So let's define geoengineering, right? They say that it's the large-scale manipulation of the Earth's environment to suit human needs and promote habitability. But they justify that, and they say that's what it is to save us from global warming. But that's how they're trying to sell it to the people, correct, Dane? They're trying to sell it as a fix for global warming or climate change.
They are, and this is where the equation becomes, again, more complex. Although we have the stated purpose of climate engineering being solar radiation management. And again, I want to stress for people, semantics are very important here. If you're trying to wake people up to this issue, you have to use the science terms. The chemtrails term has been intentionally marginalized. It leads to dead ends, conspiracy theory, hoax, or anybody who tries to search that issue. Stick to the science terms: climate engineering, geoengineering, solar radiation management. But this is the stated purpose. Now, in regard to the state of the climate, Sean, whatever a person wants to consider the cause or causes, the climate is absolutely warming, and geoengineering is fueling that fire. I want people to understand that. Climate engineering itself, being sold as a quote-unquote cure for a warming climate, is actually mathematically the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all, but not the only factor. Again, we have been very poor stewards of planet Earth. I don't think anyone can really argue that. And everything we do that damages the biosphere is a factor. There's no rationally denying that. But that being said, again, to intentionally manipulate the climate in the way that the power structure has tried is horrifically harmful. And it's the worst possible pharmaceutical quote-unquote cure, as they're trying to sell it to us as a cure for the planet. But in reality, again, there is no benevolence in these programs. And the attempt to sell them as somehow being benevolent is simply a lie. This is, again, about power and control, nothing more. So people need to understand that in regard to even the notion of this being a quote-unquote cure for climate engineering, it is making a bad situation far worse, not better. And that's never been the real underlying motive behind the climate engineering. Again, it's about power and control, period.
And you note in your video, the geoengineering assault from every direction is completely thwarting the web of life in the boreal forests of Northern California. What I found profound about your video, I found everything profound about your presentation, actually, but what I found particularly troubling was that I heard no birds chirping, Dane. I heard no birds chirping throughout the duration of that 10-minute video. Why didn't I hear any birds, Dane?
Well, there's no maybe about it. Like the most direct assault and the greatest causal factor for the science or the silence in the forest is absolutely climate engineering. When you have these toxic bioavailable materials coming down, sterilizing soils, sterilizing waters, we know in the last 10 years, as measured by a former Forest Service biologist that's done it for 35 years, we've seen a 90% decline in Shasta-Siskiyou counties, Northern California, of aquatic insect life, 90% decline in terrestrial insects. when you have this incredibly intense UV radiation bombarding us as well, in addition to the toxic bioavailable materials, metals, aluminum, barium, strontium coming down on us, we have now a shredded, completely decimated ozone layer. And Sean, we're seeing UVB levels that are as much as 1,000% higher than we're being told. That's 10 times higher. So let me break that down so your listeners can have a little better comprehension of that. We're told by all major metering agencies that no more than 5% of incoming UV should be UVB. The rest should be UVA. We're seeing 60% UVB. Now, again, that's 12 times higher. That would be 1,100% higher than what we're 1,200% higher than we're being told. Excuse me. Now we're also getting UVC on the surface. UVC is the last band of UV radiation before X-ray. So that should make it clear to people exactly how lethal this radiation is. It's burning the bark off of trees. So we have a massive decline in insects, which can only lead to a massive decline in the bird population. And now in areas in our forest that used to sound like something from the Tiki Room in Disneyland, if anybody knows what that was, where all the birds were sitting around chirping and you couldn't hear anything but birds. Now we hear nothing. We hear absolutely nothing. We rarely see a bird. And this decline has happened in 10 years, Sean. It's absolutely staggering. There's no berries on the plants for them to eat. In the film you mentioned, I showed one of the primary food sources, manzanita, with no berries, leaves scorched. We don't see turkeys anymore. It's an absolute crash, Sean.
Well, why don't we do this, Dane? Let's level set and let's talk about the three types of materials that are being used and collected. I know from Sophia Smallstorm's video, HAARP, chemtrails, and geoengineering, how they are changing you, where she discusses these three types of materials. Let's talk about that. First, I want to say, Sophia Smallstorm, what a brilliant researcher. It took me a while to figure out that she was the mind behind 9/11 Mysteries, and of course her recent Unraveling Sandy Hook in 2, 3, 4, and 5 dimensions is brilliant, and her video, HAARP, chemtrails, and geoengineering, how they are changing you, is also brilliant. She's working at a different level than most researchers. She's very, very smart, and I just want to give her credit. I want to call attention to that video. It's a must-see. HAARP, chemtrails, and geoengineering, how they are changing you. And we can touch on that, Dane, if you'd like, because the three types of materials that they are spraying are metallic salts, oxides, aluminum, barium, strontium, as you mentioned, filaments and fibers. I want to ask you about that because it triggers the question of Morgellons for me personally, and engineered biologicals. Sophia notes that these are conductive charged particles, which is a very, very bad thing. We also know from Francis Mangels, the retired federal wildlife biologist, of the extremely high aluminum levels in the water. And in Sophia's video, she credits you as noting 375,000 micrograms per liter in a pond in Bella Vista, 12,000 micrograms per liter at Mount Shasta, according to Mengels. And the feds consider safe levels to be 0.5 micrograms per liter. This is an absolute assault on humanity, Dane, and I just want to ask you about those three types of materials. How are they affecting us as human beings? How are they changing us?
Well, again, in regard to the metallic elements, obviously those are more conductive. Those particulates in the atmosphere make the atmosphere more conductive. We're seeing parts of the continental U.S. atmosphere up to 400% more conductivity than historical norms, thus the increased lightning strikes in many areas. So as we absorb those materials, we become more conductive as well. That makes us more susceptible to RF frequency. In regard to the filaments, you have patents, Sean, where the filaments are named the Welsbach patent, which is a primary climate engineering patent that names polymer fibers as part of that patent. And the purpose for the polymer fibers is to try to help keep these metallic particles aloft better, to mimic a spider web, if you will. So we have on various videos what appears to be the blending of these materials behind the aircraft, and this is what the patent calls for. So, and there has been a number of circumstances where it appears there's a mechanism malfunction and the ground gets covered with these filaments. Have you seen that before, Sean? Looks like it's covered with spider webs. The whole landscape is covered.
No, I personally have not, no.
Okay, we've seen this happen on a number of occasions. And this appears to be, again, a mechanism malfunction where the polymer fibers and the blending behind the aircraft, something goes wrong. We have a landscape, looks like it's covered with spider webs, and those filaments have been tested, and of course they can contain the same heavy metals that we would expect them to contain. They're certainly not spider webs unless spiders are building their webs out of aluminum and barium. So when the body absorbs these filaments, as we would expect, the body then tries to expel them. So we can speculate, and I think there's enough data, as Sophia presents, that there are a lot of elements perhaps in this mix, and none of them beneficial to the body. But these foreign substances, the body tries to expel. We would expect this. All these materials, especially the nanometal particulates, are all bioavailable. They're being uptaken in all plant life. According to Norwegian researchers that we've communicated with, they're seeing horizontal gene mutation in all plant life. So again, this is a complete disruption of the entire web of life. And aside from what's happening to us on a physical level individually, we're seeing the planet as a whole, its life support systems, virtually torn apart. So even if this wasn't happening to us individually, our individual health, if the planet can't support life, we're done. And we are heading in that direction, Sean, at breakneck speed. If we get to the larger mechanisms of the planet's life support systems, for example, plankton populations, which is a foundational pillar for life on Earth, the shredded ozone layer and the UV, which I mentioned, is now killing plankton. A lot of factors are killing plankton, but none as all-encompassing as the shredded UV. So we see global plankton stocks down 50 to 60%. Plankton supplies 50 to 60% of the Earth's oxygen content. The boreal forests are dying for all the reasons we mentioned, the bioavailable metals, the increased UV, the disrupted hydrological cycle. The boreal forest, the second largest source of oxygen on the planet Earth. So again, from every aspect, from our own health to the health of the planet, climate engineering is the most destructive factor of all right now. And so many people, Sean, do not seem to be able to recognize or face what they can see with their own eyes. The cognitive dissonance is incredibly hard to get around. And the normalcy bias, if you will, Sean, and I'm sure you see this in your life as well, the normalcy bias of people who can't or won't face the fact that what has been will not continue to be much longer.
And you write below your video, Dane, it is imperative to wake the masses to our common plight. All those who are already awake are needed to assist with this ongoing, critically important campaign to awaken others. Arm yourself with critical data and pass it on. Make every day count in this battle. If the trees die, we die. And I guess that brings me to this question. And your quote here in your video at 8:20 in the video, you say the agencies are not talking about it. They're not admitting to it. Their job is to hide it. Why is that, Dane? Why aren't we getting any help from governmental agencies or representatives? Are you finding any traction with anybody on this issue?
None that are willing to speak publicly. And this is one of the most critical reasons that we are in this position, because so many people have sold their honor, the only thing that they own, their morality, their obligation to the whole. They have sold it for a paycheck and a pension, and now they simply exist to toe the line for the collective insanity, to repeat whatever official narrative they've been given. I've been in the field, Sean, it was some months back, with congressional reps and USDA scientists that I know, staring at a hillside full of dead trees, and I asked, in front of the group, I asked these scientists if they saw any forest decline, and they looked at each other, they looked at the group, and said no. Now, when quote-unquote experts or government officials start to call day, night, up, down, black, white, we are truly living in an Orwellian world. And this is where we're at. So no matter how dire the situation is, no matter how indisputable and no matter how cataclysmic, their job is simply to tell everyone it's okay, it's normal, go back to sleep. And I would argue this, what's going on right now in the overall context, Sean, is the power structure is using its agencies, its employees, to keep the population calm as long as possible while they are digging in and preparing for total collapse, societal and environmental. And it's happening now. So again, if people have any desire to save and salvage any future for their children, we must stand up and face these issues. This can't be something we do in our spare time. It has to be a priority, or we have no chance.
Yeah, and I just want to say this on behalf of you and your work, Dane. I'm so grateful that there are men out there like you, men of honor, because it needs to be said that your home, your off-grid, beautiful home, your solar-powered home, completely off-grid, has been featured on the cover of magazines. You own 1,600 acres in Northern California. You could just retire into this good night and enjoy the rest of your days in peace. You do not need to trouble yourself with this issue. Certainly, if you weren't honorable, you wouldn't. It's too big. It's too ominous. There's almost bliss in ignorance. For those who don't know, they're really better off, because I don't know how we're going to stop this thing. But people ought to know that you have given your life to this fight because the science is on your side. The data is on your side. This is not delusions, okay? We are not delusional to be talking about these issues. And I just want to thank you for what you're doing, because you could have just as easily retired and enjoyed your 1,600 acres in private.
I'm not wired in a way that I could ever do that. And this is what is hard to explain, or impossible to explain, for those of us that cannot turn away. And we should embrace that fact. To not be able to turn away brings a lot of pain and difficulty for me. It's been the last 12 years of being engaged in this battle, and using my entire SEP account, my retirement account, to wage this war. But how does one not do this? That's what I don't understand. How does one not do this? How does one look at their children and turn the football game on and grab the six-pack and ignore what's happening and claim they love their children? That's what I don't understand. So again, I feel grateful that I've seen these things, or been forced to face this issue, and that I've been allowed to be a part of trying to fight it. I'm grateful for people like you, Sean, that give a voice to this issue. So those who think that they can hide, who think that they can live in whatever comfort they feel they have and can avoid facing reality, they're going to be in for a very rude awakening very, very soon. This is something that few people are ready to face, but I would argue, again, they won't have a choice for much longer. And this is where, in the course of our fight, Sean, for so many people, it feels so futile. And I read comments and I approve comments on our site every day from people who are frustrated with their family members, their friends, people who they can't seem to wake up. They feel like giving up. But I would argue, again, if we keep planting those seeds, they will be forced to sprout very, very soon. That those people who are so resistant to reality won't have a choice for much longer. They'll have to face it. So it's not futile. Our efforts are not futile. And as dark as the horizon looks, as you just alluded to, it looks very dark. But it's not yet black. And if there's a single leap we could take in the right direction, the greatest leap towards still retaining the planet's life support systems and a potential for a future, it's to expose and stop this issue. Because when the global population realizes they have been quite literally poisoned by the power structure, that everything they love, everything they care about, everything they need for their children's future survival has been obliterated by these programs, I would argue that would unite global populations to a degree that nothing else could. Nothing else. If we can simply bring this issue to light. So many people discuss that we have to file lawsuits and we have to get litigation going, or legislation and so forth. If we can simply bring this to light, that will happen on its own. I've been contacted in the last week by an attorney that's now willing to join this battle on his own. I'm connecting him up with 2 other attorneys that I already have contact with. The wheels start to turn on their own when people in various arenas that we need in this fight, when they realize that they are going down with the ship, that their jobs, their positions, their retirement accounts, none of this will matter. None of it will matter very, very soon. And that we have today to face this issue. And if we don't face this issue today, we won't have tomorrow. So again, back to what can we do to stop this? I continue to make the argument, if we can bring this issue to light, if we all work together to bring this issue to light, and that means moving the ball forward every single day with those around you, effectively, efficiently doing it, not pointing at the sky and ranting, but learning what's going on, utilizing the latest data, not marching forward with some impression you had from 10 years ago from some headline you saw that felt good, and so you believed it, and now you're still marching to the same tune. Change our compass heading every day as the data would dictate. share credible data, and help us to bring this issue to light. And if we can simply bring it to light, Sean, I would argue the rest of the wheels will start to turn and the dominoes of the power structure will start to fall.
I hope so. I will just tell you this, if it makes you feel any better, and it won't. We focus very much on the monetary situation at SGT Report. My videos starting out early on YouTube were all about precious metals and having honorable money, real money, tangible money, because the power structure is going to tank the dollar in the world economy. And it's just as hard to wake people, friends, neighbors, and colleagues up about that issue as it is anything else. The dollar paradigm, people think, will go on forever when it's actively right now coming to an end and nation states are turning against the dollar. It's the normalcy bias that you talk about. People don't want to face these issues, and this issue of geoengineering is just so much bigger, Dane. We really have our backs up against it. And before I go to readers' questions, I want to ask you one of my own, which also comes up from readers. If they know what you know, why are they doing this? And I wrote in my article that the conclusion here is that there is a battle being waged for the planet. On a statistical basis, humanity is losing. Those who hold power at the highest levels want to depopulate the planet, and the most effective way to do that is to destroy it. Am I overreaching here? Because that seems like exactly what's going on when you want to take, if you take a look at Agenda 21, if you take a look at the Bilderberg Group, if you take a look at some of the people in the highest echelons of power on this planet, it seems to me that depopulation is actively being pursued here. And as I just interviewed my friend Harley Schlanger, the video that we posted prior to this one, Harley says that the drought in California is a genocide in progress. And he notes that Governor Jerry Brown recently said that California is really only suited to support about 500 to 600,000 people. There's 38, 39 million people, Dane, in California. If Brown says it can only support 500 to 600,000 people, where are the other 38 million people going to go? Why are they doing this?
First of all, though a eugenics aspect appears to be clearly a part of these programs, it's much more complicated than that. And this is where people, if they want to stand on accurate data, they must not think dichotomously. It's much more complex. So if we go back, and certainly we know that members of our military, our brothers and sisters, are not going to carry out these programs if that's what they feel it's about. It's much more complicated. If we go back to the inception of these programs that were weather warfare, the military has always expressed its desire to control the weather. Obviously, this is an incredibly covert weapon of immense power. So as you manipulate the system for so many decades, the system begins to break apart. And the more the system unravels, the greater the military ramps up these programs. So now we have mechanisms on the planet that are triggered, climate mechanisms, climate positive feedback mechanisms that can't be turned off. And this is where people, again, their disdain for Al Gore, we all love to hate Al Gore. How do you not? He's a part of the system. He did exactly what they wanted him to do. Al Gore played a part that made people hate him so much, and justifiably so, that they now refuse to look at reality. They now refuse to believe that anything could be wrong with the planetary system and the climate system. It's all just a hoax. It's not a hoax. And even if we only look at geoengineering as the only cause for the damaged climate system, which is not true. Of course it's not true. When you cut down forests, you put 100 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere a day, you pave the planet, you poison the oceans. Those are all major decimating effects to the ecosystem. But if we ignore all that and we only look at climate engineering alone has done horrific damage to the climate system. And the more damage that's done, the more they ramp up these programs to hide that damage, Sean, just like we saw in the Gulf of Mexico with the chemical Corexit. Do you remember that?
Oh, absolutely. Corrects it, more like breaks it.
Exactly.
Poison. They poisoned the Gulf.
Exactly. So what was the goal there? Was the goal to poison the Gulf? I would argue no, but they don't care what damage they cause. The goal is to hide the problem. So Corexit made that situation in the Gulf, according to environmental impact reports, 52 times more toxic. Same philosophy applies here with the climate engineering. They will not give this up as a tool. It's a weapon for control, for eugenics, for exercising power around the world. The more they exercise this weapon, the more damage they do, and the more they have to ramp up these programs to hide that damage. It's a very vicious downward cycle. So now we have methane mass expulsion happening in the Arctic. It is happening. It's not speculation. We have metering from the atmosphere that shows methane is going through the roof. And there's many sources of methane. We have fracking. We have other sources based on industrialized civilization. But the methane deposits on the Arctic seafloor are immense. There's enough methane there to mathematically cause a Permian-style mass extinction 100 times over, and that methane is now releasing. Let's trace that back to climate engineering. If we ignore everything else, which is not rational, but let's do it for the sake of this conversation. If we ignore all other sources of damage to the planet, let's look at just climate engineering. Climate engineering has changed upper-level wind currents. This is how they manipulate the quote polar vortex, which is a completely engineered scenario. It's changed upper-level wind currents, which changes ocean currents. We have warm water pumping into the Arctic. That's thawing methane on the seafloor. Methane then migrates to the surface and into the atmosphere, where it causes even more heating, which causes even more methane to release. It's a positive feedback loop. The word positive is deceiving in this regard, but that's what it means when the loop feeds itself. So now we have real climate issues, very dangerous, threatening climate issues, and that's a reality. So the more methane it releases, the more they try to shade the atmosphere with these particulates, which actually makes the situation worse, not better. The more they try to engineer the cool down on the East Coast, which makes Americans that live in that zone think that the world couldn't possibly be heating because it's not warm where they're at. Sean, I don't know if you've seen any of my work on this, but I posted piece after piece showing clearly the most anomalously cool place in the whole world for the last 2 years is the eastern half of the US 48. Have you seen any of those maps?
Yeah, I have, and I've been watching reports from the HAARP report, a very talented YouTuber who has been discussing this manufactured polar vortex,
Correct.
All part of the propaganda. So
Correct. We also have, and a part of that as well, is chemical ice nucleation of any moisture they can get a hold of. So right now we have a snowstorm happening in Colorado. Temperatures of 40 degrees. Why is it snowing at 40 degrees? Because they can chemically nucleate it. And any who don't believe this can be done, you simply have not done your homework. You've not done any investigation. This is science fact. It's incredibly well documented. Mainstream media documented the Chinese weather modification scientists creating chemically nucleated snowstorms over Beijing in 2009 till they did $1 billion worth of damage. We have the patents going back to 1950, some to NASA for this process. So again, anywhere they can create the illusion of cold, they do. This creates public division, public confusion. A divided house can't stand, but every event they engineer makes the overall, every engineered cool down, I should say, Sean, makes the overall warming of the planet far worse, not better. So again, the very vicious cycle. In order to hide the problem, like the corrects that we just went over in the Gulf of Mexico, same thing's happening now. They're trying to confuse and divide, especially the American population, the last potentially counterbalancing population to this out-of-control power structure. They are trying to confuse and divide that population, and that's something that we must all look at data so we understand what's happening, so we don't become divided, so we stand united in this fight against climate engineering. And we recognize that climate engineering has, in fact, horrifically damaged the climate system, along with a lot of other factors, but climate engineering being the single greatest factor.
yeah, absolutely. And I want to cite this quote from Max Bliss in an interview he did with the Richie Allen Show. "The spraying we are seeing is a weapons system, a weapon against humanity," end quote. You know those 4 pictures I sent you, Dane, of the spraying above my town? You said the pics are 100% aerosol for sure. The horizon-to-horizon trails are only a small part of the total picture. But before we get to readers' questions, I just want to give you a chance to expand upon that in case we've missed anything. How is the spraying just a small part of the geoengineering picture? Is it because of HAARP and these other things?
Okay, I'll back up. I'm going to answer that question in a moment. Let me back up on the previous quote. In regard to, again, it's imperative people remember that the motivation behind these programs, our military brothers and sisters are being told that these programs are for the common good. And there are many people in this loop, scientists. I've communicated with some who absolutely believe what they are doing is necessary to slow a runaway greenhouse effect. They live in bubbles. They're not looking at the whole picture. But it's imperative that people understand the vast majority of people involved with these programs are being told and are choosing to believe that they are doing something that's necessary and for the common good. And that's why it's imperative that we reach them with credible data so that they understand what they're doing is making a bad situation far worse, not better. So people need to look at the bigger picture. As far as these trails and the horizon-to-horizon visible lines being only a part of this, many people are still, Sean, calling what is a shorter particulate sprayed dispersion, they're calling that condensation trails. That is not the case. Even the shorter bright trails are still sprayed dispersions. People need to understand that. When you see the silvery white sky, that's a sky full of particulates. We know from a high bypass turbofan jet engine, which is all military tankers, all commercial aircraft, 85% of the air that passes through that engine is non-combusted. That's basically a jet-powered fan. They're nearly incapable of producing a condensation trail except under the most extreme circumstances. We should not see anything behind these aircraft. And when we have film footage of even these shorter trails being turned on and off, that in and of itself makes clear that is not a condensation trail. So when we see the featureless skies and jets leaving what appear to be a shorter trail that eventually settles to lower levels of the atmosphere, disperses, these are all sprayed dispersions, all of this. So again, many people are only looking for these horizon-to-horizon trails. That's a big mistake, and I've been outside through too many nucleated snowstorms to count. And during these storms, in our remote area, all you can hear is jet aircraft, one after another. Sounds like you're at the end of an LAX runway when they're chemically nucleating, and that cools down the moisture. It can turn what should have been a rainstorm into a snowstorm, creates a cold layer on the ground. We all know cold air is dense, it settles to the ground. So these low temperatures we see in various areas that many people, even in our movement, Sean, that many people want to attribute to some global cooling conclusion, to come to that conclusion is to virtually ignore the fact that that event is totally engineered, completely. And this is where we need to get our data correct so that we are recognizing engineered events for what they are. In May 1st, 2013, Amarillo, Texas, Sean, was 100 degrees on the ground. I cite this event often. All-time record high. It snowed the next day. That can't happen unless it's completely chemically engineered. And this also involves jet stream manipulation. So the bottom line is this. The horizon-to-horizon trails are only one aspect of the spraying. If you don't see a blue sky and you don't see white clouds with a definitive edge on them they're wispy, cobwebby looking like what you sent me in your pictures, you're seeing aerosol skies, period.
Boy, this is really an overwhelming topic, Dane. It's so big, and I'm just so grateful that somebody like you has all the knowledge at their fingertips. I just want to say this. We're going to move on to readers' questions right now, and it would be the perfect time to make this a part 2 of the video because there are quite a few readers' questions. But in the interest of making this video hopefully get a lot of views, I want to keep all of this content in one video, and I hope everyone spreads this around, shares it, likes it. Please distribute it within your sphere of influence within social media and help us get the word out. My God, the hour is so late, you guys, in so many of the different avenues we look at, be it the monetary issues, certainly this environmental issue. There could not be a bigger environmental issue than the one we're talking about right now with Dane Wigington. Let's see here. So on to readers' questions, and Dane.
Sean, if I could just elaborate a little bit on what you just mentioned on the monetary issue.
Yes, please do.
Right now, what we see, and I'm sure you would acknowledge this, the completely artificial inflation of markets around the globe. This is yet another means of trying to hide what's unfolding until the last possible moment. And the climate engineering is. Once climate engineering is exposed, the power structure will be more dangerous than they have ever been before. I would argue we're very close to that point. And so from every direction, including the financial markets, they're trying to keep the populations calm, keep them passive. That if they feel the markets are up, they don't seem to worry about much else. So all these aspects are part and parcel of the same overall scenario. But nothing financially will matter when the biosphere doesn't support life. And for the people, again, on the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48 that have been subjected to engineered cold event after engineered cold event after engineered cold event, you must look at the bigger picture. Right now, Sean, in Siberia, right now, in areas that are normally frozen solid till mid-June, they're burning to the ground. There's some 1,400 homes that have been burnt in Siberia. Again, temperatures in the 80s and even pushing 90 in regions that are frozen normally till mid-June. I'm asking people to look at the bigger picture. Don't just look out your windowsill and think you have a picture of the whole planet. The planet looks flat from any given location, but is it flat? We know it's not, correct? So if we don't want to be a flat earther, we need to look at the bigger picture, understand that the geoengineering has torn the planet apart, along with a lot of other things the human race has done. And if we're to pass on credible data and unite people in this fight, especially people from academia, we need to stand on solid conclusions. That's my point.
Yeah, and it's a good point. You triggered a thought here, and it's that I truly believe and have believed for a very long time that there is a war being waged against humanity, and I can see it all coming into full view now. We seem to be right in the thick of it, and it's easy to deny what's going on. It's easy to stick your head in the sand and want it to not be true. But I'll tell you, Dane, there was recently one of these, I think it was a military contractor PR firm. The name of the company escapes me, but there was recently a statement by one of these military contractor PR firms saying that by the year 2025, the population of the United States might be around 70 to 80 million. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's sort of easy now to see how that could actually come into fruition. If they're going to shut down California, if they are going to have this engineered drought go on, in perpetuity, if they are going to do water rationing and they're going to shut down the farmers but not the frackers, we can see this plan, this very evil plan coming into view, in which depopulation of the United States not only becomes fathomable, it becomes possible. And I think at the end of the day, Dane, the content of this call is very, very important because it helps us see the big picture. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're helping us see the big picture and put a finer point on it. If they have the Georgia Guidestones, which talks about humanity living in perpetual harmony with the environment and reducing population to 500 or 600 million globally, that's depopulation. I think this is a depopulation agenda.
Certainly, again, I would argue that that is absolutely a part of the agenda, but the agenda is complex. And you also have now a desperate attempt by the power structure, who I believe felt they could play God with the weather indefinitely.
Right.
They now know they have triggered things they can't turn off. Again, the methane mass expulsion in the Arctic being the most dire of those feedback mechanisms. And now I believe the power structure is in a panic. And as far as the report you mentioned about depopulating the U.S., the entire world is going to crash from its current form. There's no question about that. China is a snake eating its own tail. You know about the ghost cities in China, I'm sure, cities that were built simply to keep the GDP going. This paradigm cannot and will not continue much longer. In the case of the California drought, again, this is where people must be careful. If they insinuate that the only reason for the drought being caused in California, which is engineered, by the way, 100% a result of climate engineering. This is a 2 + 2 = 4. You can't do what they're doing upstream, and I've documented this in my presentations. Engineered drought catastrophe, target California, satellite images, the jet stream images. We know this is an engineered event. But if people insinuate that the only reason for that is to cause the population to crash in the state, I think we need to look at a little wider picture. I'm not saying that's not a part of the picture, but also we see a direct correlation. I've noted a direct correlation between a desperate attempt to keep the remaining ice in the Arctic and what's happening in California. Every single time since 2007, when the Arctic ice first began to truly crash, that's when we saw this particular pattern locked in over California, this, quote, ridiculously resilient ridge. Goes back to 2007. So every time the bad news comes from the Arctic, we see this ridge locked in over California. We see a particular pattern that pumps the moisture up through Alaska, warms Alaska. They go down and pick up moisture from the Gulf Coast, cool the eastern half of the U.S., and that moisture then is pumped toward the Arctic, where it's chemically nucleated in a desperate and destructive attempt to try to keep what remaining ice is there. So what I'm getting at is not only is California a target, it is likely California is also a climate sacrifice zone. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, actually. It makes a lot of sense. And it also fulfills their plan for Agenda 21, which is to try to depopulate rural regions and hoard millions of people into hellish cities in small apartments. Think Mexico City, even worse. So it really plays into a dual agenda, in my opinion.
It does. It does. And this is, again, where people, if they don't think dichotomously, they must understand there are many aspects, many layers to the onion. But on the current course, Sean, there is no hole deep enough for the power structure to hide in. If we stay on this course, mathematically speaking, everyone goes down. The planet and life on the planet goes down. This is a mathematical certainty on the current trajectory. Again, the species extinction rate, which we've talked about before, being 200 species of plant and animal a day going extinct. It looks like those numbers may be approaching 300 a day. We're in the sixth great mass extinction now. Again, on the current trajectory, nothing lives. We must change course. People must join this fight. The climate engineering issue, which is many more issues. Again, that's biological warfare, weather warfare. It's many issues. I want people to understand. I don't mean it's just a climate engineering issue. But if we do not deal with this issue soon, nothing else will matter.
Okay, and now to readers' questions, and you just answered Bill's question. Number one, is the drought in California being geoengineered? You answered that just moments ago. He goes on to ask, since spraying goes on worldwide, which entity is coordinating it? And before you answer, Dane, I want you to know that you can certainly say, I don't know, to any of these questions, because you certainly aren't expected to have all of the answers to every question. But he asks, which entity would be coordinating this if it's happening worldwide?
If I don't know, I certainly will say so, but I can give a general answer to that. We know there's collaboration between the major powers. The NATO countries are certainly involved on one side of that fence, China and Russia on the other. I found photographs of Soviet weather modification scientists touring U.S. weather modification facilities in 1968 at the height of the Cold War. There's absolutely collaboration on these programs. All the major powers are involved. So again, to nail down a particular entity, I don't think we can do that. But we can say all the major recognized governments are certainly a part of these programs. There's no question about that.
Okay, and just to bump that out a little bit with the limited knowledge I have, there is a lot of evidence to suggest the CIA is involved in the spraying with some of the planes they own and some of the companies that are CIA companies, correct?
Yeah, Evergreen Aviation certainly appears to be a contractor involved, but you also have, this is where the equation becomes very complex. And again, there's some people that claim it's only military tankers spraying, and this is simply not the case. We've identified commercial aircraft leaving particulate trails behind them. KLM, Southwest, AA, FedEx. We don't believe the carrier personnel or employees are involved, but their aircraft are being used, and this creates artificial stimulation for the economy. It keeps non-profitable routes flying in the air and provides more aircraft for these programs. So there's a lot of entities involved, no question about that, Sean. And I've spoken to personally, face-to-face, a top executive with Jeppesen, who's a subsidiary of Boeing. Jeppesen, private contractor that coordinates all global flights, getting at, again, all the entities involved. I spoke to him for 15 minutes about more peripheral issues. The moment I mentioned geoengineering, he turned his back and walked away. There are so many people that have sold their soul, for lack of any better term. That's the accurate term. They've sold their honor, their morality, their virtue, and are participating in these programs for a paycheck and a pension. So this is the largest web of covert activity in front of our face that has ever happened with the human race. I mean, these programs are massive.
Okay, and the next series of questions came from Rodster, but his questions were all about CERN. So I just want to acknowledge Rodster's contributions, but we're going to move on here since this is about geoengineering. Hugo asks, are there countries we can point to that don't spray? Hugo and Willie T are basically asking the same questions. Are there countries we can point to that don't spray? As the unipolar world breaks up, things like this can't be kept under the radar, kept under the hat for long, can they?
Well, they're really not under the hat. They're just not acknowledged, and they're marginalized. We have, in regard to who's not spraying, let's start with Iran. Let's start with the Iranian president, who's been on the floor of the UN twice, the VP, also from Iran, stating publicly, although our media never covered it, that their countries were being droughted out by NATO weather modification programs. Let's look at every single country that's been recently destabilized, this destabilization led by our government. Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran, all droughted out. Let's go back even further to the sub-Saharan African countries, all of which have U.S. boots on the ground, all of which have gone through horrific protracted drought directly related to climate engineering programs. These programs have been used as a hammer for countries to get them to submit to U.S. occupation for decades, absolute decades. So when you see a country that tries to stand up against these programs, and several years back, it looked as if Ireland was trying to show resistance to these programs. And who was the first to crash financially? Ireland. Mexico. We had data from people we know in Mexico that indicated the Mexican government was starting to push back against these programs. And what happened? It appeared that the spraying was reduced for a time. Then we had the big swine flu Mexico outbreak, which was maybe a shot across Mexico's bow, and the spraying resumed right afterward. Any country who tries to show resistance to these programs appears to be put under the hammer. So with the exception of countries like Iran, who've openly, publicly spoken out against these programs, the other countries are forced into submission, and that appears to be what's happening.
And I just want to cite this document. As you mentioned, controlling the weather and causing drought. This is a very important Air Force white paper, guys. You can find this with a Google search. It's titled Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. It's a document that I believe was published in the 90s, and here we are at 2015. They already own the weather, I think at least 10 years early, and they do use weather as a weapon. That's a fact. The next question, and you did clarify this earlier on in the call, but I'm going to read it anyway, so if you just want to give a very brief response. Dissolution, one of our frequent commenters, writes, please clarify your position on global warming. You appear to support this theory. And again, you made it very clear that Al Gore did a great job brainwashing us all into, hating him and hating anything he stands for. So if he was talking about global warming, clearly it can't be happening, and the opposite must be true. It's a very much more nuanced issue at this point, isn't it?
If Al Gore said the world was round, should we take the position that it's flat? Again, that's not rational thought. Oceans are off the scale with temperatures. We're seeing temperatures in the Arctic, in some regions, the Arctic Ocean, 30 degrees above normal. There's no question as to whether the planet's warming or not. That's an absolutely indisputable fact. We can speculate as to why, but again, if we look at climate engineering alone, we know that's contributing to the warming. So if we ignore this fact, here's where it becomes a problem, because a lot of people think we should just ignore whether it's warming or not. If they come to us and try to sell us, which they may at some point very soon, to sell us climate engineering as a cure for the warming planet, if people already know that climate engineering is making the situation far worse, not better, it can only hurt the situation, it can only make the warming worse, then people will not buy what they're selling. In addition to climate engineering toxifying everything around the globe, but also with academia, if we are to have any chance winning this battle, if we don't stand on credible conclusions, then we have no chance in ever building a bridge with the academicians now that are in total denial about the climate engineering. If we don't stand on credible data on our end, they will throw everything we say out the window. How can we win a battle when the house is divided? We can't. We can't. So again, although I feel the same disdain for Al Gore that everyone else feels, carbon credits are a complete sham,
right.
It doesn't change the fact that the climate system is damaged, and people need to get over their hate for Al Gore, look at solid facts, look at solid data, come to solid conclusions, so we can have a chance at uniting in this battle with those in academia and having a chance at stopping climate engineering.
Very well said. I'm so glad you mentioned carbon credits and selling carbon credits and Al Gore and the Rothschilds and everybody else saying, hey, we can fix this, just pay us money. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Okay, and moving on here, Steve D asks, how does it end if they keep this on schedule and if we don't stop it?
We are on track right now for what's scientifically termed Venus syndrome. I encourage your listeners to Google search that term. That means that these feedback mechanisms, which I mentioned earlier, continue to gain momentum. And as this unfolds, this is an extremely non-linear equation. People who have been trained to believe that any climate changes or biosphere changes take place over centuries or millennium, this is absolutely not the case. We are in, again, as I stated, a very non-linear equation. So right now, mathematically, if this ship doesn't change direction completely, we are headed for a planet that mathematically will not support life based on the best numbers available past 2040. The Northern Hemisphere likely much earlier than that. That's how dire our situation is. And if people examine, again, right now, the kind of die-off we have happening around the globe, the fact that we're in the sixth great mass extinction, the fact that global pelagic fish populations are 95% depleted, bluefin tuna 97% depleted, the oceans are 30% more acidic than they were at the start of the Industrial Revolution. The planet is crashing and burning right now. We must change directions completely. So that's where we end up, Sean, is Venus syndrome. And people who think that Venus is 900 degrees on the surface because it's so close to the sun, this is not mathematically correct. All things being equal, Sean, Venus would be 20 to 25 degrees warmer than Earth. That's it. But it's 900 degrees on the planet surface because it underwent a runaway greenhouse effect. And now the atmosphere is so dense, the heat comes in and nothing gets out. And that's exactly the track we're on. Methane is like a layer of glass around the atmosphere. As I mentioned earlier, methane is flooding the atmosphere right now. And over a 10-year time horizon, methane is 100 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. Methane is will be the true final nail in our collective coffins if the methane expulsion continues. So we're back to climate engineering. We're back to allowing the planet to respond on its own, which it can't right now. It's in a geoengineering straitjacket, which is tearing the life support systems apart and contaminating the entire thread of life. We must stop these programs, Sean, if we were to have any chance. If we don't change course, mathematically speaking, we have no chance, even for the short-term horizon.
And our friend Eric Dubin from News Doctors made a comment here, and I just want to share this with you, Dane, and get your opinion on it. He says, Google CIA and geoengineering. There was a huge burst of news media coverage at the end of 2014 and into the first couple months of 2015. And he ponders if that was deep state PR firms pushing it for some unknown reason, maybe in order to bring up the excuse of geoengineering and to kind of get that into the public consciousness as the excuse for pushing the climate change propaganda. You note in your video, Dane, that we're now being told that climate engineers want to start using the terms albedo enhancement or cloud reflectivity enhancement because they don't want to use the term geoengineering any longer because people are waking up to that term. So what's the best way to address Eric Dubin's observation there, Dane, about a huge burst of news media coverage at the end of 2014 and into 2015?
I saw a bit of it, and certainly they're trying to introduce the term to the public, but I would first advise Eric and any that have the same conclusions that when we refer to climate change propaganda, that's to deny that the climate is changing, and that simply doesn't help us build bridges with those in academia who recognize, rightfully so in this case, the climate is absolutely changing. Climate engineering is a huge part of why it's changing, not the only part. So if right now, I believe, Sean, to try to put this in a nutshell, the changes that are happening can't be hidden much longer. We have Arctic ice, in spite of the headlines that so many people bought. Arctic ice is at all-time record lows right now. I challenge your listeners to look at this. It's not about Al Gore. It's not about the carbon credit sham. It's about reality and real damage that's been done to the planet, much of it by climate engineering. They can't hide this much longer. At the point in time, they can't hide the fact that the cryosphere is imploding, then they can't hide climate engineering. At the point in time they can't hide climate engineering, our paradigm changes because then the entire planet realizes they have all been irreparably damaged. They've all been poisoned and contaminated by these programs. That makes the power structure more dangerous than ever. That leads us to Jade Helm, military exercises that are being lined up right now, which I'm sure you know about. And now, what else might they do? What else might they do to cause a massive environmental cataclysm like the one that caused Fukushima, which again appears to be directly related to the ionosphere heaters? And we have credible institutions like MIT that have documented this atmospheric heating. And I'm reading you a headline right now, Sean, from 2 days ago. A 1,000-mile stretch of the Pacific Ocean has heated up several degrees, and scientists don't know why. What's happening there? Are the ionosphere heaters being used again? I don't claim to know, but I'm saying there are incredibly anomalous things happening. Are they trying to trigger another seismic event? Is that possible? Yes, scientifically it is possible, and it appears to have happened. I just did an interview yesterday with former Army Major General Bert Stubblebine, which I'll publish later today. This is a former Army general acknowledging that Fukushima, or the quake that triggered Fukushima, was a direct result of ionosphere heater signals. So again, the data indicates that they do have this power. Is there something else being attempted right now in order to bring the final blow to what's unraveling around us? And is the Jade Helm and military exercise a part of the preparation for this? We can't know. No one can see exactly how this is going to unfold unless they're on the inside. But I would argue this: their ability to hide the gravity of what we face and what is unfolding is waning by the day. They can't hide it much longer, and it's likely that the power structure will play some very big cards soon. So we would all be wise to use every day we can to help sound the alarm, Sean, and do that with credible data. Don't do it with an impression you had from something that felt good to believe 5 years ago. Look, learn, get rid of your filters, and look through a clear lens. That's our best chance of gaining traction and changing direction.
I'm so glad that you're out there, Dane, doing your level best to inform people and to wake up humanity, to wake up Americans, because we are the last bastion of freedom on this planet. We need to stand up, and we need to try to take this thing back before we hit the point of no return. And the point of no return seems to be coming on quickly.
It is. And again, if people would abandon fear and remember what's the worst that can happen is we get a ticket out of the insane asylum, because we're all literally in an insane asylum at the moment. So if people focus their energies on every single day waking up those around them with credible data, pass on some credible data, have a flyer. We have informational flyers on Geoengineering Watch that people can download for free, Sean. Pass something credible on to people to help wake them up. Don't point at the sky and rant and rave. Do it in a credible manner, an effective manner, and do it every single day. Every single day matters in this battle. So if we all pull together, we can yet accomplish a tremendous amount of good, even at this late hour, Sean.
Well, I just want to call attention to your fabulous website again. It's geoengineeringwatch.org. And, the work you're doing, I don't know anybody else out there that is doing the work that you're doing, Dane, but we're just so lucky to have you, and we're so lucky to have men like you out there, men and women out there like you. Is there any way that we can help support what you're doing? I know it costs a lot of money. You've been using your retirement to fund this fight. Do you take donations? Is there anything our listeners can do to help support you?
The thing that I would ask people to do the most is just be active. Simply be active and arm yourself again with credible data. Go make flyers at your local copy store. In fact, if you make them, there's places to get flyers, Sean, that are much cheaper than, say, Kinko's. I mean, if people find out a printer that will make a lot of flyers cheap, get a credible flyer, and simply what I would ask people to do is to make every day count. Bring these with you. Reach out to those around you. Move the ball forward. Start spot fires of awareness in your area. Hold a viewing, perhaps, with one of the presentations that are on the homepage of GeoWatch. Bring people together and help them to be prepared to start spot fires as well. If we can start enough of these spot fires of awareness in enough places, Sean, the power structure can't put that out, and we'll reach critical mass of awareness, which will start all the other wheels turning that I mentioned earlier. So that's what I would ask people to do, is to simply be active and start raising awareness in your own area from your own home computer. We have links on Geoengineering Watch, the upper left flaming arrow link, and activist suggestions. Use those links and make every day count. Start as many fires of awareness as you can wherever you're at.
Absolutely. And I just want to say one last thing here. Don C., Jacobson, Jeff, Matt, a lot of questions here. I think we got to all of your questions have been answered through the course of this interview. I feel confident we've answered everyone's questions, and I want to give a shout out to Eric, who did note at 12:17 p.m. on April 14th in the comments. He said, I think I'm going to print out some of Dane's flyers from his website right now and go post them on the bulletin board at the store. I bet it only takes one day before they are removed, because the morons don't like being out of their comfort zone. But yeah, guys, go and grab flyers from Dane's website and start putting them on cars and parking lots. Start putting them on bulletin boards at the church, at the grocery store. Call attention to Dane's site and get people to go there so that they wake up. At the end of the day, that's the only hope we have, Dane, is if people wake up. We have to wake them up.
And those seeds, again, what I stress for people when they get resistance from their friends and families, the seeds of awareness you plant will be forced to sprout soon as their worlds start to implode around them. So plant the seed and move on. If they're resistive, just pass the message on and move on to the next potential person to wake up and keep going. Don't let that resistance slow you down, because those who don't want to wake up now will be forced to wake up soon, Sean.
Well, Dane, I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time. You spent an awful lot of time with us today, and I sure hope that people share this video. I hope it gets 1 million views. That would be terrific. Thank you so much for all you do, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean.
Guys, I want to thank you so much for listening. Please do share this within your sphere of influence. Thank you for your support at sgtreport.com. We love all you guys. We appreciate your truth-telling, and so many of you have so much courage. Thank you. Thank you for all you do. Bye-bye.